good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are in Australia. I would like to welcome you all today to TAFE Talks. Before I begin, in the spirit of reconciliation, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the country upon which we meet today. I pay my respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here with us today. I'm coming to you from Melbourne, which is on the land of the Wurundjeri people. So today's TAFE Talks coincides with International Women's Day, which is a day to recognise and celebrate how far we've come towards gender equality, but also to reflect on how far we have left to go. For today's session, we've assembled 3 inspiring speakers to celebrate the leadership of women in vocational education and training on International Women's Day. Firstly, I'd like to introduce Mish Eastman, who is the Deputy Vice-Chancellor for Vocational Education and Vice President at RMIT. Welcome, Mish. We're also joined by Sally Curtain, who is the Chief Executive Officer at Bendigo Kangan Institute. Welcome to you, Sally. And our third speaker today is Kit McMahon, who is the National Co-convenor of Women in Adult Vocational Education, or WAVE, and CEO of Women's Health in the South East. Thanks for joining us today, Kit. So Sally and Mish will present on the impact of COVID-19 and the ways in which it transformed their institutions and shaped leadership through times of crisis. Kit will be discussing the lived experience of women in the current vet system, including the challenges and opportunities presented by inequity. In terms of the format today, we're going to hear from all 3 of our speakers first. They all have up to 15 minutes each, and I will let you know when you're just about to run out of time, if you get to that point. And then we're going to open up the floor at the end for questions from our participants. So just a reminder to our participants that if you do have a question for one of our speakers, could you please use the Q&A box? You can still use the chat for your chat and your commentary, but any questions for our speakers, please put them in the Q&A box. It just makes it a bit easier for us to manage and answer them at the end. So without further ado, I would like to hand over to Mish Eastman from RMIT to begin. Thanks, Mish.
Thanks so much, Lyndall. It's a real pleasure and privilege to be here today. Before we get underway, thank you for your acknowledgement, and I also would like to acknowledge all First Nations ancestors and elders, past and present, across Australia and whichever lands you are coming to us from, and also pay my respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today in the virtual world. So as the slide says, my name's Mish Eastman. I have the delight of working at RMIT University, which is a dual sector university based in Melbourne. Our university connects with about 100,000 students every year, and we've got a workforce of about 10,000, and we're based in Melbourne, but we also have campuses in Vietnam and in Barcelona in Spain. I joined RMIT in November of 2019. So our organisation has a long history, over 134 years, of being grounded as an applied organisation that stemmed from being the Working Man's College and then grew from that. When I was privileged enough to join RMIT in November of 2019, there was an ask and a requirement for me to look at how vocational education was offered at RMIT University, to create a new strategic direction and vision for what that could and should look like, and then to create a compelling model that received the authorising environment of our University Council, our internal and external stakeholders, our staff and future students. Part of that, of course, included identifying, creating new models of education and training, working with our industry partners, ensuring we had strong tertiary pathways and understanding how to create educational employment success for our learners. So between November 2019 and then March of 2020, we had done a whole heap of significant work on developing a vision and an operating model and a 5-year strategic roadmap for vocational education and applied learning at RMIT. The proposition was to bring together what had been a distributed model across our organisation and create a new college of VE, which brought together over 1,000 staff and programs that connect with 20,000 students. And as we headed into 2020, all seemed to be going pretty well, but then we know what came next. Palak, I'll get you to move to the next slide, please. Excuse me. So, of course, 2020, COVID came and changed the world as we know it. And not just for a few months, but for what ended up being a few years. Our schools were remote, as was most tertiary education. The impacts on the university sector in Australia included shedding over 17,000 jobs in 2020 and $1.8 billion of revenue compared to 2019. Many universities' operating revenue fell by more than 5%, and RMIT was directly and significantly affected. So we needed strong leadership to steer us through this crisis, and that's what I'm going to focus on as soon as I stop coughing. If we can go to the next slide, please, Palat. So, in times of crisis, leaders play a crucial role in guiding their teams or their organisations through difficulties. And most importantly, creating a sense of we've got this and building our teams together, or if not done well, creating a sense of chaos, unease and mistrust. So my experience is about positive leadership during a crisis and how to really anchor in the we've got this theme rather than the sense of mistrust. So firstly, what helped do that? And there's 3 themes here about welcome to the unknown. Maintaining that sense of hope and optimism, even in the face of adversity, was crucial to how we were able to navigate through. A leader who can remain positive and confident in the face of a crisis will support and inspire their teams to persevere. Before I joined vocational education, my professional journey kicked off as an emergency department and critical care nurse. So through that lived experience, I gained first-hand alignment with leading amidst chaos in the everyday and working under intense pressure with significant consequences if you didn't get it right. This background has equipped me throughout my career and leadership journey with a deep appreciation of the importance of staying focused on what truly counts and being able to sort what matters from the sidetracked, from the peripheral distractions. So this background has meant understanding and valuing each member of the team within my teams, being clear on roles, expectations and accountabilities, and being able to sort and triage are core skills and strengths that I rely on and build from. In my life in healthcare, every single person in the team mattered, from the cleaner, the ward clerk, the nursing team, through to the emergency department physician. And in education, every single person in the team matters, from the Q3 staff member or the admin most junior staff member through to the most senior academic leader. That mindset and methodology has really, throughout the pandemic, ensured that we used an approach of connecting with a new and developing team in the virtual world and being purposeful and deliberate about that so that I could build trust, credibility and confidence. Remembering I only started in the November before we had the global pandemic kick in the March of 2020. So some of the practical techniques that I used to support and navigate this major change with and build our team included holding weekly and at some times during peak pressure and rapidly changing situations daily catch-ups with my executive team, with my extended senior leadership team and with our group of people managers, the team leaders who were responsible for our teachers, our community, our technical staff, and of course our students. This ended up being a group of about 60 people, the ones who had the most impact and influence, but who also shouldered the huge amount of burden in supporting people, students and staff through so much disruption. These connection points facilitated both formal confirmation and sharing of updated information, as well as informal Q&A sessions. And it really started to live and breathe my approach to enabling the distribution of leadership and the promotion of trust through the building of lifetime credibility, teamwork, confidence, and clarity, and also being authentic about the things we didn't know and that we needed to create solutions to together. We embedded the why within the community and ensured that we had purpose-driven decision-making to come back to, clarification and frank communication so that we would end up with shared principles for local leaders to adopt and to implement within their own context. The second aspect about be experimental and building capability involves building the capability within your own teams. So much research shows us that middle level layers of people leaders have the greatest impact. Building our capability and trust of these leaders within the virtual world was a make or break situation for a new college coming together. There was work to do in tooling up our people leaders with agreed and expected actions, deliverables and behaviours, and talking in plain English, not having weasel words and not having grey. So we invested in dedicated training and leadership programs for these key leaders and ensured that they were supported with the skills, the tools, the resources, and also the authorising environment and confidence that they needed to adapt to an ever-changing environment. It was built on a basis of trust and that people were doing the best they could in the times that they had, avoiding blame, avoiding criticism, and approaching things with curiosity and support. With these key members of my team leading with authenticity and providing the environment for our people to fail fast, we nurtured creativity and innovation in many, many solutions to this unknown situation we were all placed in. Thirdly, finding balance, understanding that we're all human. Positive leadership involves empowering your team to find what works for them with regard to working together, to find their own solutions. We got to see into people's personal lives like never before. Remember those days of the pets and the children interrupting Teams or Zoom meetings, potentially running behind you naked unexpectedly, as my teenage son used to do. The washing in the background, the track pants and hoodies and Ugg boots that we wore as we progressively got less and less businesslike and more embedded in our houses and homes. Well, those of us in Victoria did anyway. As leaders, it was our responsibility to allow people the space to find balance in their new world and to respect the challenges of this everyday life which people had. So really articulating and building in how valuable walking meetings were. You didn't have to be on screen and on all the time. Stop looking for that green light to see if your colleague is available on Teams and just ringing them just because. Give people time to be on and off. We held virtual drinks and trivia. We had huge teams that ran online talent shows, particularly our business and enterprise cluster at RMIT, who was such a delight to witness. Our accountants and our legal team, for example, sharing their their love and creativity of guitar playing and singing and poetry and art. It was amazing. They were moments of small joy, and they got us all through our 262 days of intense lockdowns. And they built in real terms a culture of kindness and care, and to make sure that we remembered at all times to listen with soft ears. So when thinking about how we're able to innovate and pivot to a blended learning model of delivery and create a new college and our ways of working and bringing 1,000 people on a journey, positive leadership played a crucial part, leading with hope and not with fear. If you have your North Star and you're clear on your guardrails, it doesn't always matter how you get to your goal. Our clarity of purpose and passionate leadership are the crucial ingredients in being able to foster that innovation and navigate through whatever the crisis. We'll just go to the next slide pretty quickly, please, Palak, which is in practice, what did this look like? Well, we had our people really create amazing solutions, as did everybody, no doubt, on this call today, about what simulating in real life work conditions could look like with student-centred approaches. The remedial massage students, for example, being able to work out if there was someone in their share house, in their home, in their vicinity, who they were able legally and lawfully to access, where they could video and demonstrate their application of their skills in real time, so that authentic assessment could be ticked off and they could continue their learning with us rather than stall for 6 or 12 months. There's so many there. But the best thing I could do and our team could do as leaders was enable our incredible educators to innovate and experiment, to tool them up and support the delivery of their ideas, to invest when we needed to, so that they delivered so much more than we could have imagined. We'll go to the next slide, please, Palak. So here we are in 2021 on International Women's Day. And I just want to finish by landing on one of my key idols, Julia Gillard. Gender doesn't explain everything and it doesn't explain nothing. It explains some things. These words were spoken by Julia Gillard during her last speech as Australia's first Prime Minister, and they still resonate with many, and for me, they still ring true. In 2023, that's the year we're in, I think I said something else before, but don't worry about that. Statistics are showing us, most current research, that it will still take a further 100 years if we stay on the same trajectory for Australia to reach gender pay parity, and a further 100 years for us to reach 40% of leadership roles in the top 300 countries within Australia. This is not something we can accept. I am not tolerant for another 100 years, nor should any of us be in the sector that we work within and the influence and the shape that we have. When it comes to leadership, there is just so much more to be done. Women are not on an equal footing in either our public or our private lives. Despite the fact that we make up more than half of the workforce, we're still underrepresented in leadership positions, particularly in male-dominated industries, in those that we partner with in vocational education, like engineering, like trades, like IT. One of the most frustrating things about this disparity is that women are often judged twice as harshly as men when leading through a crisis. We're not only expected to perform at a high level, but our leadership style is still scrutinised in a gendered lens in a way that men's are not. For example, if a woman is decisive and takes charge during a crisis, she might be seen as bossy or emotional. But if a man takes the same approach, he's often praised for being so clear and strong in leadership. I know firsthand how challenging it can be to juggle the responsibilities of being a woman, a mother, and a leader. I was reminded of this a few years ago when I was on a different International Women's Day panel. My son was unwell. I was receiving calls from his school throughout the panel, which made it particularly difficult to focus and present my ideas. But even though I was struggling, I knew I had to keep pushing forward and representing women in leadership to the best of my ability. But also through revealing my authentic dilemma to the audience, I was connecting with people in a way that had an amazing consequence. I exposed my vulnerability, which enabled so many who were in less formal leadership roles to reach out to me after that event and connect and say it was such a strong lived experience that so many of us had been through. It reminded me how powerful and privileged it is to be a woman in leadership, not through what you say, but through what you do. We need to lift up our next generation of women and girls to crack the code of representation barriers, not only gender, but intersectional. And we also need to measure to track difference. You cannot be and evaluate what you cannot see. So moving forward, how do we create a more equitable society for women in leadership? Well, it starts with awareness and education. We need to continue to have these conversations, not just on International Women's Day, and to advocate for change. We need to acknowledge the biases that exist in our workplaces and commit to making changes to support women. And in conclusion, as we work towards gender equality, it's essential that we finish strong and are as passionate about the role of women in the vet sector. As aptly said by Julia Gillard, it's our responsibility to continue pushing towards a future where women have equal opportunities in leadership and also in every aspect of work, education and life. Thanks, Lyndall and TAFE Directors Australia for the opportunity. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Mish. A really interesting presentation, lots of interesting perspectives and experiences that reminded me of the good old days of COVID there in our Ugg boots and naked teenagers running around. But I think I agree with you. I don't think we can accept that we have to wait another 100 years for change. So thanks, Mish. If anyone has any questions for Mish, please remember you can put them in the Q&A. I'd now like to hand over to Sally Curtain, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Bendigo Kangan Institute in Victoria. Over to you, Sally.
Thanks very much, Lyndall, and certainly thanks to Mish. I confessed earlier, this is the first time my team is letting me share my screen, so everyone hold your breath while this occurs. This looks right. Share. Whilst that is hopefully connecting, someone's given me the thumbs up. Thank you very much, Mish. I'm also coming from Wurundjeri country and would like to begin by acknowledging the custodians. Particularly today, I'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri women and celebrate them and acknowledge them and all traditional owners who are on the call today. I am the CEO of Bendigo Kangan Institute, which is on the screen. It's a TAFE here in Victoria. Hopefully I'm sliding through here. Yes, I'm showing you the map here of Victoria, showing you where we are located. So a bit unique in the model here in Victoria. We're in metropolitan and regional Victoria. So that gives you a bit of a handle on where we've been locating. And really Mish set the scene so beautifully for what the experience was like here in Victoria during COVID. And always for me, when you start to articulate so clearly, Mish, what it was like, I do sort of get sort of takes me back to those moments. And probably, it was a bloody tough time is what I'll say. But going back to that time, I was a new to the TAFE sector. So Mish and I have a bit in common in that we both started our jobs around November 2019, and different to Mish, I was new to TAFE. So I've been a career public servant, but strangely enough, my undergrad, so my training was in leading and managing a pandemic, bizarrely. So that kind of came in handy, enter 2020, but the story will be told in a moment, but just probably wanted to provide that by way of background. Is I was very much and continue to be on a steep learning curve about TAFE and could never have understood the complexity or great challenge in delivering services, let alone during a pandemic. But this is us. We have 4 brands, in fact, and I'm in a working TAFE right now. So if you hear noises happening behind me, it means the spray painters are at work. We have 4 brands: Bendigo TAFE Kangan Institute. We also have BetAssess, who conduct the skill migration assessment for the federal government, and eWorks, which is a learning management system which many of you possibly utilise. So that's, again, another great thing about working in vocational education. It's the great diversity that you get to work with and through, and the great customers that we get to work with and partners. I did want to start by talking about how do we provide leadership and play our leadership role in growing equality, and particularly as we're talking about today for women. Very quickly, in stepping into this, which is effectively my first CEO role, I decided that to lead from the front and to promote the great women in our sector, and particularly our students. And you'll see, if you follow on LinkedIn or our socials, that's an active campaign that is happening, pretty much for the last 3 years, where we showcase women and promote them. And there was a fantastic article in, I think it's today's Bendigo Advertiser, about our electrical teacher who has this amazing story. So perhaps we'll shoot that through after here. But highlighting a few of our students of the year, we are working at the moment with She Can to increase women in trades and to try and create pathways and platform for that. Probably my question today for this audience, and I'm presuming most people work in TAFE, is, and I asked for some data leading into today about how have we increased the numbers of women in trade just at our institute alone, and it's been glacial growth, frankly. So we've increased by a couple of % in the last 5 years, which just isn't enough. So my question today, perhaps for people with love any ideas, what's really going to shift the dial? What's really going to move us forward? Increasing access, perhaps it's access, but what is going to make the difference? Trades, engineering, IT, Mish reeled them off earlier. What is going to make the biggest difference? We've had great opportunity here in Victoria, where the Victorian government has supported us with free TAFE, really creating great pathways, attracting women as part of the free TAFE program, particularly during COVID, because we knew that women were particularly impacted, but it's not making the difference. It's not shifting the dial as much as we would like here. So any help, any ideas you've got, please help us. In Victoria, we also have a requirement to have a gender equality action plan, which has helped us measure how we're progressing. Interestingly, for us, 60% of our women, of senior leaders are women, and 85% of our board are women. We actually only have 1 male member. So where there are lots of examples, and Mish reeled off right across Australia, I would say we're certainly bucking the trend. We have a gender pay gap on average in Australia is about 50%. At our institute, it's 5%, but we are looking to close that gap. So we are making as many inroads as we can, and I'm a big believer in measurement, and I think that's got to be part of the answer for us moving forward, my personal view. I'll move on to talking about the topic for today, which was leading through crisis. And effectively what we were doing here at this institute was essentially trying to boil the ocean. We had a plan to transform. We had a backdrop, and it's really set out well on this slide here about why we needed to transform. We'd merged the Metropolitan TAFE and a regional TAFE. We had system implementation failure. We had a corruption inquiry. We had industrial disputes. We had huge, extraordinary staff and executive turnover. And almost complete system failure, frankly. And that sort of created the backdrop as to why we needed to take on to really improve everything essentially about the way that we worked. And so we came at this fresh in 2020 with a new strategy for the organisation, and essentially identified at least 40 projects that we needed to implement over the next couple of years to get us onto a reasonable offering, I suppose. So that was what we took on, but of course, along came COVID. So we'd sort of embarked upon this change program, significant change, and then you add COVID on top of it, and it was a fascinating experience. And I guess we had some choice during that to stop, to flip and, really focus, just as Mish had set out, how we're going to move to this blended delivering model. A couple of things went our way, and I'll probably always take those. One of the things I did upon arrival was say, okay, I was sort of seeing the technology that everyone was using, and some of the devices were 13, 14 years old. And we ordered a fleet of laptops, which now seems like a stroke of genius to have ordered those in November 2019, and they arrived in February 2020. And, obviously we set all of them up and we were able to roll them out. I think it was the week before we were in lockdown here in Melbourne. So pretty amazing circumstances. But again, these are kind of some of the calls that you make, and that one kind of went our way. That was handy. But just on the timeline here, it really sets out what we tried to do over a period of time. And we ran in sprints, so 90-day sprints, but you can sort of see lockdowns that were happening in parallel to that. So we were on, almost daily Zoom calls as a TAFE network. We were also in parallel working on this transformation. And I'll have some reflections at the end about taking on all of this at once. I guess we're here and live to tell the tale. So I think we've come out of this now in a great position to be able to be much more responsive, and I'll talk about that a little bit. But everyone here, I'm sure on the call, knows implementing a new student management system is likened in a TAFE is likened to performing heart surgery. And we've just gone through that process and gone live in January this year. So I'm sure there'll be questions or comments about that. But when I talk about 40 things that we did, that's the biggest thing that we've taken on to do. That for us at this institute is 34 systems into one. So this is incredibly complex, deep work, and it's taken us 3 years to be able to do it as an indicator of some of the things that we've done. Similar to Mish, we've moved to a new operating model. Really try to get us ultimately to be financially sustainable, but we all with the objective to achieve our vision to be recognised as a leading vocational education provider here in Australia. I thought this slide might be helpful, and hopefully this starts to look like an operating model to you guys, but this is our operating model, and we are using this, and I'm trying to use this to illustrate about all of the different elements that our program, and Mish mentioned about having a North Star. Our transformation program is called North Star. We operate in the North here in Victoria, so that was a great segue too, Mish. Just to give you a sense, so on those shaded areas there now, this is where each of the projects impacted across our operating model. So it's both on our channels. We replaced all our websites, call centre upgrade, our delivery channels. So we've upgraded campuses, moved online. We've, in terms of our student cohorts, impacted each of those. So we've really moved to a segmented model around mainstream, apprentice and foundation. It's impacted staff dramatically. There's been a huge capability uplift required. We've implemented a digital student record for all enrolment activity. New student management system, new products are being developed, and pretty much everything back of house, new systems have been implemented, new finance system. We didn't have a contract management system. We never had a record management system. So there were things that there'll be gaping holes, frankly, and we've managed to fill those during this period of time. And we actually, at the end of this month, we finish. This is our second last sprint, so next month is our last sprint of this program, and I'm sure everyone's going to be really excited to see the back of it, frankly. But here we are to tell the tale. But I just wanted to give you a sense of the size of the scale and where it's impacting across our operating model. And probably, to be fair, the PMO should be covered in that too, because we had to create it to do this implementation. We didn't have one prior to this. And to give you a sense about what we've been able to achieve, I've made up this maturity model. So it's one that you would have seen before. So whether something is initiated, defined, repeatable, or optimized, or best in class, up the x-axis, y-axis, sorry. And then across the bottom are just the elements that we've been working on over this period of time. So take you back to 2019. This is my assessment. This is not a scientific measure. This is my assessment of where we're at when I arrived. We were, really good at marketing and remain. I think it's a great strength of ours. We were dedicated to the students, and our industry experience and our teaching capability was always strong. but we just didn't have the tools and things that people needed to be able to do their jobs as well as possible. Come 2020, we were able to, really set up a new strategy, start to grow the sort of culture and set the definition of the culture that we wanted to create, really uplift in cybersecurity. And again, that came in super handy over the last couple of years, but this can only happen through investment. And we had a very low base for our reputation, so really worked on growing our reputation. Come to 2021, again, you can see sort of broader improvement right across the board, particularly risk and governance, culture and capability, huge growth in that space. The team just worked, and I guess one of the things that we were able to do during this time is connect with all staff. Where there may have previously been a metropolitan and a regional divide, everyone was just at home in their study, frankly, or wherever we were working. So it was a real sort of leveller and a uniter of our TAFE during COVID. So it was perhaps one of the silver linings, if you want to put it that way. Come to last year, some significant growth again in our cybersecurity. In those independent assessments, we're seen as best in class across the network. Our product improved significantly, and this was all part of we had our re-reg last year and received that for the next 7 years, as every other TAFE in Victoria did. But we had huge amounts that we needed to do, so significant improvement in quality and product during that time. And I guess just in the outer years, here's what we're working towards this year. Come 2024, we really want to be best in class in a number of these areas, and that's what we're working towards at the moment. But hopefully that starts to tell you quite a bit about the journey that we've been on, and this great challenge of leadership of implementing during COVID when you're effectively boiling the TAFE ocean. As I said, we did live to tell the tale, and we always said we're going to measure the effectiveness of this by our students, by our employers, by our staff and our partners. And we've, across every element of the, whose survey is it? NCBR survey, we improved across every student measure last year. So this was great for us at a huge jump on improved employment status. So, and vet students with a positive perception of teaching, which is a great source of pride, particularly for our teachers. And late last year, we were recognised as the large training provider of the year, which just could not have been imagined a few years ago. And for those people who have been with the Institute throughout, since 2014 and before, the resilience they showed, but also the commitment to the organisation and frankly to their students has kind of got us to this point. A few reflections and then I'll wrap up back to you, Lyndall. Am I okay for time?
Yes, you are. You've got about a minute to go, Sally. You're all good.
Perfect. I'm free and home quick. I guess a few things, like everyone would say you would never do this, never take on to boil the ocean. Sometimes you got no choice. If we'd gone about this in a linear way and, let's get this thing in first and then the next thing, inevitably when you look at our operating system, you do something over here, it impacts down here. And if you kind of don't take the risk and really the courage to take on to do a lot at once, effectively, it's a bit like our current pace of achieving gender equality. It's going to be 100 years. Well, we're looking at 100 years ourselves. So we did have to take on to do much more than you would normally choose to do at once. Perfect is the enemy of good. For anyone who wanted to be involved, as long as you were committed to it and believed in it, it's amazing what the belief can do. And setting a very clear destination helps people to land the target as well. I'd say again, there were times where everyone said, can we just stop? This is too hard. Let's push back the time. And we did that rarely, but always reluctantly. You've got to kind of hold your ground and keep moving forward. My very strong view is that people have far more sort of capacity than they know of themselves, and people have reflected that here who have worked on these projects themselves that would never have believed that we could have done these things, and now of course they're very proud of what we've been able to achieve. you've got to get your benefits right and to be able to track those all the way through, because obviously evidence is really important both for your board, but for your people themselves, and to know if you're on track. So setting up the benefits framework is key. Getting your governance right, you don't want that to bog you down. There is capacity within the organisation. We ran an EOI across the organisation, say who wants to be involved in these projects, and everyone, all the leaders were telling me all my staff are busy. We had 70 people put their hand up, and they found the time in their day to be involved. So it's really, I guess my question is, put it to the people about where their capacity is, and they know best where their capacity is. It's also, ultimately, all of this is about culture change. We are wanting to create a culture that is student-oriented, that is flexible and nimble and able to be responsive to industry needs. And my job in this always has been to make it safe to fail, because there isn't this perfect playbook here that we could emulate and copy, and particularly not during COVID. So, you know, I made calls all the way through, but provided the running cover when things didn't work as we'd hoped. So that's our story. Hopefully that made sense to everyone. It's a bit of a whistle stop to kind of get this down into 10 minutes, but I'm happy to take any questions at the end, and back to you. Thanks, Lyndall.
Thanks so much, Sally, and really congratulations to you and to Bendigo Kangan, you know, for that really positive journey that you've just sort of laid out for us. So, yeah, thank you very much. I'll now turn to Kit McMahon, who is our final speaker for today. Kit is the National Co-convenor of Women in Adult Vocational Education and the CEO of Women's Health in the South East. So over to you, Kit.
Thank you so much, TDA, Lyndall. Thank you to Sally and Mish for those incredible presentations and sharing of journeys of change. I also want to acknowledge that I'm actually coming to you today from Bunurong land, which is the land down running down southeast parts of Melbourne. I want to pay my respects to Aboriginal elders, past, present and emerging, and any Aboriginal peoples that are here today, the first educators, the first carers of this land and our peoples. Always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I guess my sharing today is going to be looking at the context outside of this thing that we lovingly call the vocational education and training sector, and really using this moment at this day, at this time, to talk about those intersecting realities that impact women and women of colour and women with disability and women representing different lived experience. And what that means in their lives. And the invitation that I'd like to ask us all on the line here today is to consider, what role do we have in addressing what are in fact systemic and structural inequalities? That and Wave's contention and my knowledge of working as a woman that prevents violence against women, that works in sexual and reproductive health, that mental health for women's well-being, is a very lived experience for many women. I agree, Mish. Julia Gillard is an incredible role model, but as an educated woman in place of power who is white, there was a privilege that she had. And I think if you reflect on her words post that parliament, she would actually say that gender had more to do with it than she realised at the time. We start this conversation by thinking about the environment women live in. And look, our contention strongly from a skills perspective is that skilled women have more superannuation. They are going to have housing. And the reality is that they will be able to make choices in their lives and their children's lives that is nothing short of them being able to live, because it gives them the ability to escape violence and to escape other forms of harm. The Women's Health Services in Victoria through the COVID, we were at the coalface of the experience of women in our community with COVID. And that lived experience was very telling about the reality about why we need to provide and apply a gender lens to our work. The migrant and refugee women, that there's a project that it's all online. It was called the Women's Project. It was a network of bicultural women workers that worked with and in community around supporting COVID safety and COVID safe practices. But for the migrant and refugee women that we connected with, what we know is that 21% of them were not aware of the government support that was able to them. Nearly all of them, 90%, had multiple hardships, not only their gender, but their language, the access that they had to other resources, and the access to income and transport, etc., to get to address the situation that they're in. But the 40% of them had job loss. They had their hours cut and unemployed. And yes, those figures have turned around, but the gendered nature of work and skill in our life means that those women were at the edge of that because of the jobs that they have. 50% of them reported that they had an increase in unpaid care work as a result and through COVID. These are not unusual stories. Those of us know it. We know that COVID-19 really showed the reality that of the gendered problem. It was gendered. It had a marked impact on women's well-being and their life. And, you know, the escalation in mental health issues that women faced, the impact in loss of income, and also the depletion of the superannuation. People in my sector take a lot of attention into the laws around superannuation because we know that there is a disproportionate impact that women face when those laws are freed up, if not immediately, then certainly at the end of our lives. So when we come to think about equality, it's our request for you to consider is that participation in the workplace needs to be considered within an ecosystem of inequity. That where women go to make decisions about skilling and jobs, there are a number of things that they have barriers put in front of them or that they consider. And these things are more than just, will I get a job? Will I go and get a course? They are the mental load that they carry, the domestic labour that they are carrying, the safety both in the home and in the workplace. There's a care penalty that they take, but also those broader systemic realities of the gender pay gap. And in education and training, Sally is right. Kangan Batman is leading the way, and many are, but that experience is not common. And Wajia tells us that the further you go into rural and regional areas in the education and training sector, the gap gets bigger. There is a remote penalty in the sector. There is a reality in this country of a segregated labour market by gender, which is seemingly intractable. But where we come to in terms of skills and education policy, we need to understand that we can cast a gender lens over our pedagogy, the way that specialisation is accessed by women, and skills specialisation leads to higher wages. There's barriers there. That we actually need to disaggregate the way we measure and forecast our skills, our places and policies. Free TAFE is fantastic, but our experience at WAVE is that there's a gendered experience of that. And finally, we need to invest in the skills pathways that are dominated by women. It's very nice that plumbing gets about $19 an hour, and I'm quoting from data available through what was the National Skills Commission, but there is no equity when providers only get $5 an hour to teach a childcare worker at the same AQF level. That does not make sense. So in our skills system is a thing, right? Gender inequity is a thing, and how does it impact it? From a family violence perspective, when you go into a TAFE, on average, 1 in 4 women will be killed per week by their partner or former partner. And the majority of women do not disclose that. They do not disclose that. We know that safety for women on a work site is a challenge, where 4 out of 5 of the perpetrators are male. There is a pay gap. it's ongoing, it's all around us, and there's a whole range of reasons why that's the case, including the care burden, including the fact that we pay the roles that women are in less. And as I said before, we pay the skilling pathways that invest in the skilling pathways that are mainly female dominated less as well. So we can kind of acknowledge this and embrace this. And I want to just pay respect to Mish and Sally's leadership, that the leadership that they display to go through those massive change initiatives is the same leadership and leadership skills that can be applied to addressing the reality we face. I want to pay tribute to a recent publication that was put out through NCVR by Elaine Butler and Fran Ferrier. It's called a landmark work, but it is landmark both in name and in nature. And I encourage everyone to go and review that, because it has done a fundamental review of the journey of equity since the 1960s, since Kangan, right? And what it says is across the whole era of this, equity is not being achieved. It's while notions of fairness alongside racialised, gendered and class-based disclosures can be traced back to the origins of what we call VET, it has not been solved, right? That the approach that we do to put equity into our system has been distributive rather than what WAVE knows it needs to be, which is foundational and core to our work. From a VET system itself, as I said, we entrench stereotyping present in our workforce, in our VET sector, in the skilling pathways. We have in this country blokes jobs and jobs for women or chicks, and that is reflected in our skills pathways. And it's reinforced back into the system again, I would argue, based on the data in terms of the educators that we put into those skills pathways. We unknowingly reinforce that stereotype. The capital that we invest, as I said, we invest more money, more dollars into those skilled pathways that are male dominated. And it is because of complex equivalences that we have around what skill pathways need to be funded more because of the type of skill that is deployed. I have had lovely conversations with people about justifying the fact that you need to spend less on aged care training than you do on construction training, asking, you know, if you want to follow that complex equivalence to the natural end, are the aged care clients worth less than plumbing? Clearly not. And finally, the experience of women in VET. Yes, there is about parity. There is about parity between men and women in their participation. But the experience differs, not only in the pathways, but if you look at the reasons why people leave, if you disaggregate that by gender, women leave for personal reasons more than men. Men leave because they get the skill or they get the job, but women leave because of personal reasons. And that's the classification that's captured by NCVR. The question is, how do we solve this? Well, we go back to where I started. Leadership is critical, but we actually need to understand that this is more than access, right? This is addressing the systemic and structural realities of gender inequity that perpetrate all aspects of our system. What is our pedagogy? What stereotypes are we reinforcing through that? What stereotypes are we reinforcing through the investment and the capital models that we put into our resources and the way that we pay people, as well as the education and training system? Are we actually putting barriers in place to women to improve their specialisation and skills? And while we're out there, what barriers are we putting in place to men embracing care pathways, right? There is some fascinating research out of our northern parts of our world that actually identify that the stereotypes that men face when they go into childcare or teaching is, quote, they're either the class clown or the possible perp. The work and the reflections that we do about addressing women in trade stereotypes has got to be the same thing for all genders. What are the stereotypes that we're putting on men for being in care work? We actually need to understand that when women come to skills pathways, they are balancing more than just a choice of, will I do that course? Will I do that job? They are making decisions on a whole range of parts of their world, including the care load that they have, the safety concerns that they have, and you need to read any RMIT report on the building equality policy in Victoria to see that. Go and look at the mining report of FIFO work out of WA, or the Queensland Ombudsman report for women in trade pathways, to see the reality of that safety impact, let alone respect at work from Kate Jenkins. But there's also the safety, the lived experience of safety of women in the home and in the community. Finally, we need to actually understand that there are higher opportunity costs to women improving their skills and increasing their opportunities in the workforce. So the question that we can then ask ourselves is, well, what role do I, as a training provider, does the training and skilling system have to address that? I think that the ability for any organisation to address inequity is as much within their grasp as it is to go on a major transformation program. Gender equality is cultures and systems and structural change, and it has to be more than the attraction strategy. Another part of my job is I sit on the board, I'm the chair of Trades Women Australia Group, and I'm often fascinated about the investment that we do to attract women into trade, when actually, as a questioner is put on the Q&A, it actually requires us to also recognise those systems and structures that exist within the employment or learning pathway need to change. We can no longer assume a project management plan of a construction site based on 10 hours a day, 7 days a week, when we know the lived experience of women in care, and be surprised when they perhaps don't want to take up that job, let alone the safety issues in that site. We can think about and challenge our own assumption as leaders, as educators, about, well, what is the environment and the learning programs and design that we're putting in place? And we can also say, well, how are we measuring success? How can we understand and measure the impact that we're having, not just for one group of students as a cohort, but for the diversity of students that we want to attract in our local region, and see having fulfilling work lives beyond their experience in our TAFE sector. I think the other thing that we can do as a sector is say that this is something that we want to address and can. Gender mainstreamers or gender equity people like myself, what we know is to do this actually requires the opportunity to develop people's capacity and capability to address it within their own selves and within their community. And doing the work actually asks us to reflect on our own assumptions, that we have our own and indeed our own privilege. I'm very conscious as a white educated woman, my understanding of the world is privileged, and that by doing my work, I actually need to go and talk to those people whose lived experience I want to change. That's why WAVE calls very clearly and keenly to the current federal government reform that it is no longer appropriate that we centre only one voice in our consultation processes, but that we make sure we are centering and doing our level best to engage with all end users and lived experience across our education and training system. We want to see students at the table. We want to see educators at the table. We want to see community organisations at the table. We want to see people who are unemployed at the table. And we want to see people and women especially at these decision-making tables when we're making decisions about curriculum, when we're making decisions about training package, funding, and indeed what traineeships and apprenticeships we need to put on that skills occupation list.
Just so we can have a couple of minutes for
and I've finished now, Lyndall. I've absolutely finished. Thank you very much. I hope that that was helpful and added value to the work that you're doing. But thank you, TDA, for the opportunity.
Thank you, Kit. That was a really great presentation. I just wanted to spend the last couple of minutes, if we can. There was a question from Kevin Hayes to Mish, which to an extent has been answered by Kit, but I'd like to just give Mish an opportunity if she wanted to. Kevin's question was, to use his words, how would you recommend that you bring the blokes with you in the age of Aquarius, in the age of growth in the service and caring industries, along with technology and environmental matters? Mish, did you have a couple of thoughts you wanted to share on that one?
Yeah, noting we're fast running out of time. I guess my challenge for us all is this is not women's work to solve. Like with family violence, which is another area that I'm deeply involved in, it's not women's business and it's not women's work to solve. We are 50% of the population and we need the other 50% to start doing extensive and heavy lifting around this. So when we hold International Women's Day events, I'm really struck by the fact that when I was at a lunch, it was 95%, 99% female at the lunch. What can we do differently for next year so that at least 50% of participants are hearing these messages and contributing to what the next steps need to be? Because if it's only seen as women's work, it again aligns with all of those legacies, barriers, social constructs that Kit talked so extensively about as well. So bringing in, lifting up, but requiring everybody to do the heavy lifting, not just the women sitting at the table.
Thanks, Mish. And we are out of time. I would like to thank our three speakers today. They really were inspiring and we've learned a lot from you today. So thank you very much. And we look forward to seeing everyone at our next TAFE Talks, which is on the 29th of March. So thanks again and goodbye.